Welcome back to Fossil Ridge Games. Today I'm going to walk you through Nemesis Lockdown. This is an amazing board game in the sci-fi horror genre. The characters find themselves awakening in an abandoned Martian research facility. As they start to piece together the events of what happened, they soon find out that the base is infested with an aggressive alien presence. This alien presence loves and hides in the darkness, and as the lights start to go out in this base, so does the danger increase for the characters. They struggle to traverse this amazing alien base, trying to figure out how to survive. So if you're looking for a board game that has an amazing sci-fi horror theme, this is literally it. Now, I am going to caution you, the complexity of this game is fairly high. That's why I'm going to put together this series of videos. I'm going to help new players with all of the different rules, and I'm going to walk you through how to be successful when you play this game. In addition to that, the game is complex, but more so, it is very, very difficult to play, but it's also very satisfying when you win the game. So if this sounds like a game for you, please stay tuned. I'm going to walk you through all the rules and ways for you to win and survive in Nemesis Lockdown. All of the miniatures that you purchase in Nemesis Lockdown, they actually come unpainted, and they are basically a gray color. So as an example, here's what the coloration of the miniatures will look like when you purchase this game. What you can do pretty effectively and very cheaply and quickly is take some sort of white base coat or primer paint and paint it onto your miniatures, and then after that use some sort of very liquidy, so a watery style paint, just like a monocolor paint, and then paint over the primer. So these are all solid color types of washes that I'm using on these miniatures, and very quickly you can give some depth, to the miniature, and it gives it a little bit of shadowing. And then on the actual characters themselves, what I went ahead and did was simply match them to the player board. So like, as an example, we have the hacker, which is a green character. I went ahead and just took the hacker miniature and painted it green to correspond to its player board. So with a very minimal amount of effort, you can give a lot of depth and a lot of color to your miniatures for this game. I'm going to go ahead and take some time and walk you through some of the basics of this board. This is a very complex game, so having a basic overview of the board and what's on it, I think, is really important in understanding the overall flow of the game. This game occurs in a base that is located on Mars, and kind of the premise of the game is that there is an alien infestation that occurs within the base, and the characters are forced to figure out how to survive and then meet certain objectives. So first and foremost, one of your objectives is to survive and actually get out of the base and get to a safe spot, or lock yourself down inside the base and make sure that you survive. Secondarily, you'll be given objectives, and each of the objectives will be unique to a given player. And so you're going to be completing objectives. Sometimes the objective is to ensure one of the other players doesn't survive if you're playing sort of the normal mode of the game. So first and foremost, we're going to walk you through kind of what we're looking at. So what you're going to see at the top of the board, and I'm going to go ahead and point to it. So what you're going to see at the top, this is going to be the turn tracker, and you have a certain number of turns to actually get outside of the base. Otherwise, you just simply lose the game. So there is a defined number of turns and thus rounds associated with this game. And if you can't get out of the base, you simply lose the game. Next up is the rover, and this is a miniature that we're using. And you can take the rover over to what's called the bunker on the right-hand side of the board. This is going to be one of the ways that you can survive the game. And I'm going to go into a lot more detail on how these mechanics actually work. Next up, we have a couple key rooms that are in the base that we'll go over. First one is the repository. This is going to be one of the starting locations for some of the characters. And then consequently, we have another room toward the bottom end of the board. This is called the isolation room. This is going to be another starting location for a lot of your characters. This base is broken down into several different floors. So we have the top floor up here, and there's going to be a power marker for this floor. If the power marker is turned to the red side, the power is off. If the power marker is turned onto the blue side, it means the power is on for that entire floor. I'll walk through some of the mechanics, but just understand this. If the lights are on, your chance of survival is a lot better than if the lights go out. The aliens become super aggressive in the dark, and they are very dangerous. Next up, we have the second floor. This is sort of the middle floor. And then finally, we have the bottom floor of the base. Another notable room is the backup power supply. This thing will always be in the game. It's always in the same location. This is how you turn the power on to various different floors. Extremely important mechanic. A lot of new players don't understand that having the lights on means survival. So I'm going to go ahead and walk you through a little bit later what that looks like. So the rest of the board is organized, and you can see a collection of hexagons on this board. So there is a pile of tiles. I'll go ahead and just show you a quick pile of tiles. So at the beginning of the game, these are randomized and they're placed face down on the different locations. As you explore, they're going to be flipped over, and it's then going to expose what the actual room is, and each room has slightly different game mechanics. So really the name of the game is that you start off in this base, you explore the base, you try to figure out where the rooms are, then each of those rooms can be tied to your objectives, and then consequently there are certain ways that you can escape the base, and I'll go ahead and walk you through next. First and foremost, how you survive the game, and then we're going to start working on objectives and then combat mechanics later on. One of the ways that you can survive lockdown is by using what's called a CSS, and this is a cargo sending system. So kind of what occurs in the game is that there are these pods that can be shot from the base into orbit, and basically what's happening is that you're moving supplies back and forth from a different location in orbit. Now, although these pods are intended for items to move back and forth between orbit, the characters themselves can actually climb into these pods and thus escape this base. So one of the ways that you can survive lockdown is by actually putting yourself in these cargo sending systems and launching off. And what does that look like? So on the board, I'm just going to go ahead and take the miniature off. And so we have what's called a cargo sending system C room. And this is going to be located in the second tier rooms. There's also a cargo sending system A and B room also located on the map when you are playing this game. So you have the possibility of using 3 different cargo sending systems to help escape this base. A little bit later, I'm going to walk you through what this means. There is an action number on here that says 2, and basically this is just going to be you have to spend 2 action cards from your hand to use this room. I'll go into more detail on how to use actions at a later time. Also, what you're going to see at the top of this board, there are numerous markers called CSS, and there is a random component to this. So one of these CSS tokens is returned to the box, and the other ones are just randomized and placed down onto the map. So as this time tracker begins to progress across the top here, when you hit certain turns, certain cargo sending systems are automatically going to be launched from the base. So this is kind of a process in which, as you start exploring the base, then maybe you get your objectives completed, and then what you're going to do is figure out if you can jump into one of these cargo sending systems and then move off into orbit and survive the game. So as an example, if we hit turn 10, it's going to launch this cargo sending system. And as we flip the tile over, it says on launch, and what happened, or I'm sorry, no launch. And what happens in this case is that the character that is trying to ride in this pod is actually injured and takes a serious wound. And I'll show you a little bit later what serious wounds are about. But if the character tries to escape the base and no launch occurs, they actually get injured. So in this case, our poor character was unable to go up in the cargo sending system, then thus they would have to wait till the next marker. So a few turns later, now what happens is that it launches all of the cargo pods. So A, B, and C would all be launched into orbit. And if our happy little lab rat character happened to be on the cargo sending system C, they would launch into orbit and thus escape the base. When this happens, this character is removed from the game and no longer functions or actions. They cannot be killed, they cannot complete their objectives, they cannot help other characters in the base itself. So they're just considered removed from the game until the very end. And then you check to see who actually wins. So consequently, as we go through this game, different cargo pods are going to be launching as time continues. Now, what makes this difficult is that the players have no idea what's actually on these tiles, and they're also randomized on every game. So you can you can have situations where you're trying to launch out of the cargo pod, and you keep becoming injured, and it can be a little bit frustrating. So there are mechanics in the game that allow you to peek at these different tiles that are on the board, and also some of them allow you to move them as well. So you can move it forward or you can move it back to help aid in you actually escaping. So this is a very cool mechanic, and this is one of the ways that you can survive a game of Lockdown. Next, we're going to have a pretty complex discussion about another way to escape the base toward the end of the game. So if you see toward the top of this map, we have this rover. And what a character can do is take the rover, so their player piece can get onto the rover, and then they can travel over to the bunker. So the bunker is going to be located on the right-hand side of the board. This is going to be a safe area. When a character reaches the bunker, they are also removed from the game, and they no longer act in the game, and they are considered safe. Any number of characters can end up in the bunker. This is kind of opposite of what can happen in the isolation room, and only one character can actually end up in the isolation room. Multiple characters can end up in this bunker. Now, here's where some of the complexity in the game comes in, is that first and foremost, this door to the bunker is actually sealed at the start of the game, which means that characters can't actually access the bunker. They can't escape the base until a certain number of things occur. Now, when you're playing a multiplayer game, which is typically how you're going to play this, if another one of the characters is eliminated, so let's say you're playing the game and you have two friends playing with you, if one of your friends' characters gets killed and eliminated from the game, this door on the bunker is automatically removed, and now you can access the bunker. And so what that means is you can take this rover over to the bunker, but only one character can ride on that rover at a time. And then once the rover gets over to this side of the board, it's basically trapped there, and you have to move it back. And there's a couple different ways that you can do that. The other way that you can reach the bunker is with what's called the Enviro Suit. So I'm going to go ahead and pick it up and kind of zoom in on this. This is going to be a crafted item, and we'll talk about crafted items later. In addition to that, you can find this item readily in what's called the guard room. So what does that look like? I'm going to go ahead and pop over to the guard room. So I'm going to zoom in on the guard room, and basically what this says is that you can take equipment. So if you want to try to escape the base, one of the ways that you can do it is you can also get this environmental suit by going to this room, paying the action cost, and then just simply taking this piece of equipment. And what this will allow you to do is that if you are in the top of the map in this room, instead of taking the rover, your character can now just simply walk from here to the bunker, and they can do it safely because they are in an environmental suit. So that is one of the basic ways that you can escape the game. In the next clip, I'm going to walk you through the auto destruct token. And what does that do? It's another way that you can remove that bunker door. So next we're going to figure out how the auto destruct sequence works with the main gate on the bunker. So these things are actually tied together, but it's not very intuitive when you begin playing this game. There's going to be a room in the game called the cooling system. And if you look on the card, it says auto destruction sequence can be initiated. So kind of what does that mean? We're going to go ahead and take a look at the top of the game board. So as we talked about before, there's a time tracker located at the top of this board. So for grins, what I'm going to do is just point to this time marker. When the time marker is here, we're going to see that there's an auto destruct token, and this thing is double-sided. There's a red side and there's a yellow side associated with that. So if a player character goes into the cooling system room and they start the auto destruct, what's going to happen is that this yellow marker is placed onto the board, and it's going to be placed 3 locations ahead of the time marker. And what's going to happen is that this time marker is going to move closer and closer and closer, and eventually it's going to hit this location right here. When it does, this token is flipped over and it's moved an additional 3 spaces forward. Now, basically what's happening here is that, and actually it's only going to be 1 space gap when it moves the second time. If this token ever hits here, the base is destroyed and it explodes. But what does this mean in conjunction with our character that's trying to get outside the base? So as this time marker begins to move forward and this thing flips over and then moves forward, when this occurs, the main gate on the base is actually removed. So this is an alert sort of protocol that's happening in the base. The base understands that it's going to be destroyed and it automatically opens the door. So when you're trying to get to the bunker, sometimes you don't want to wait for another one of the characters to die in the game. You want to speed things up and you want to make sure that you can get this bunker door open so that everybody can get out. So it's really unintuitive, this order of operations that occurs when you're playing this game. But one of the survival techniques is literally starting the auto destruct so you can get this door open. So right now is probably the most opportune point in this video to talk about the power generator itself. This is one of those generic tokens. It's one of the level 1 tokens that's placed onto the board. So to the right of it, we have the cooling system. So we just learned that we can initiate an auto destruct on the base by using this cooling system. So kind of the counter move to starting the auto destruct is this power generator room. While the token, the auto destruct token, is yellow, so I'm just going to go ahead and grab it real quick and throw it onto the screen so we can see it right here. We got the yellow auto destruct token. While that is on the time tracker, we can actually shut down the auto destruct. Once this token flips to red, it can no longer be shut down. But while this thing is yellow, if you ever want to shut down the auto destruct, you simply go to the power generator room and you turn it off. And so thus it removes this tracker from the game board itself. Now the auto destruct can be turned back on, obviously, and it can move back and forth, but eventually you're just going to start running out of time. So that's why these rooms are related, and it's a good thing to notice if you're trying to get out and you don't want to be blown up in the base. There is another way that characters can survive this horrific base, and that's going to be the isolation room. So on the 3rd floor of the base, sort of in the bottom right-hand corner, there's going to be a room called the isolation room. So I'll go ahead and just zoom in on that token. This is one of the rooms that's always in the game, and a lot of the characters can start here. I think there's like 2 characters that can start down here on the isolation room itself. So this isolation room can't be used until a couple different things happen. It's kind of like the bunker door, but unless you understand how this works, you just don't even know how to get out of this base alive. So what happens is the time token, and I'm going to go ahead and just zoom back up to the top of the map, and we're going to look at the time token. So I'm going to walk around the table and point to it. So right here is the time token, and when it hits position 8, notice that the background for this, all of these are white. And then before that, these are not white. So this is kind of a good indication. It helps you remember what happens. So once this hits position number 8, what you do is you go back down to the isolation room. So I'm going to go ahead and pop just back down to the isolation room. I'm going to zoom in. What you do is you just simply take this token and you turn it over. And from this point onward, you have an option to use the isolation room. It says lock yourself into the isolation room. So if you take your character down here, and moving forward, once this is open, this is a way that you can survive the game. Now here's a caveat for this. Only one character can be locked in this room. So once a character locks themselves into this room, no other characters can do that. So they can't use that as a viable means for survival once somebody is already locked in the isolation room. Now, just as there was with the bunker door, there's another sort of complex series of events that you can do to open up this isolation room a little bit earlier in the game. So I'm going to go ahead and walk you through what that looks like. So at this point, we have a good understanding that we can also survive a game of lockdown by entering the isolation room. Now we can either wait until we hit turn 8, and then the isolation room opens up on its own, or the alert procedure can be initiated. In the exact center of this board, there's this room, and it's not actually a tile. And so this is one of those things that when I'm teaching a new player, I make sure and I tell them about it. In addition to that, I have placed an alert token actually on there. And then consequently as well, when the cooling system is also revealed, I always put this auto destruct token on it, and it kind of keys the players in that you can do something special in that room with these time tokens. So in the center of the board is the alert room, and you can initiate what's called an alert protocol. So I'm going to go ahead and just zoom in so you can see this room a little bit better. And if you initiate the alert protocol, you're going to take this token and thus you're going to move it up to the time tracker, and we're going to do something special on the time tracker as well. So when the alert protocol is initiated, something kind of unique happens. So we're going to walk over to the board and we're going to take a look at it. So we're going to say that we're on turn 10. And we can tell because the time tracker is on 10. Now the alert procedure says to take this number and divide by 2. So 10 divided by 2 is going to be 5. So I'm going to place this alert marker onto the board, this time tracker. So as this time tracker begins to move, I'm okay until it moves beyond this. And if it ever moves beyond the alert protocol, this triggers the immediate end of the game. And thus, then you move to see if you have completed your objectives and you've survived the mission or whatnot. So why would you want to do this? And it all kind of keys on that isolation room itself. And also, too, when you're playing this game, there are some more competitive style versions of the game where you get your objective done, then you sort of trigger this alert protocol. And what that does is that it makes it almost impossible for other players to get their objectives done. So sometimes you want to make sure that the other players don't survive. So maybe you have an antagonistic style objective where one of the other opponents has to be destroyed. So in that case, you can do these things to kind of speed up the demise of the game and the demise of the other player characters. In addition to that, if you really have a pretty strong presence on the board and you want to get this game done, and you understand that time is of the essence, you don't want to wait until turn 8 to open up the isolation room, so you can do it early. The longer that you stay in this game, the bigger chance that you're going to be killed by one of the aliens. So as an example, once you start that alert procedure, so let's say this is on the sort of start tile, which begins the game. If you then start the alert procedure, it flips over this isolation room, and it allows one character to lock themselves into that room. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and do a quick summary of the different ways that you can survive a game of Lockdown. So first and foremost, we have the cargo sending systems. So I'm going to go ahead and just point to the tracker up here. Remember that you can launch the cargo sending systems. There's 3 different rooms in which this can be done. These tokens will flip over and allow you to be successful or not successful in trying to escape the base itself. Next up, we have the rover. So we can take the rover over to the bunker, or we can get ourselves an enviro suit and then walk over to the bunker. But the main point of this is that we have to make sure that this bunker door is actually open, otherwise we can't get into the bunker. Next up, we have the isolation room. So I'm going to go ahead and pop down to the bottom of the map. So when the game starts, this isolation token is going to be inactive. We either have to wait a certain amount of time, or we can initiate the alert procedure to actually get that open. So these are the 3 ways that you can survive a game of Lockdown. And it might seem a little bit counterintuitive when I'm telling you about how to survive, but if you don't know how to actually survive, completing your objectives is almost meaningless, so that's why I kind of did it at the beginning. Now, I didn't go into a lot of detail on some of the text surrounding these different rooms that we talked about. Please go to the reference sheets that are included with the game and also the rule book. I just wanted to give you a general overview of how things are pieced together. I'm not sure the rule book, especially the first time you play it and the first time you read the rule book, everything's intuitive of how everything fits together. Each of the characters in Lockdown has a customized board. In this case, we're going to look at the lab rat. Located just to the left of the player board is an action deck. Each of the characters in Lockdown has a unique set of 10 cards that you're going to be using over the course of the game, and they have different special abilities and actions that you can perform. Next, we're going to have a quick conversation about the different types of items in Lockdown. You have both heavy and light items. So first I'm going to pick up this card right here, and notice that there's no icons in the upper right-hand corner. This is going to be a light style item that's present in the game. That means you can have as many of these as you wish. Next up, I'm going to go to the Enviro suit and point to the upper right-hand corner, and you can see that there's a little handle icon. This means that the item is a heavy item, and what that means is that you can only have two of them. One heavy item located in your right hand, and one heavy item located in your left hand. Next, we have three different types of tokens. I've kind of placed them in the left hand just to kind of let you know these are objects, but these are also known as heavy items throughout the course of the game. So the first thing that we're going to look at is the carcass token. Secondarily, we can have player corpses, and then finally an egg. All of these items are objects. They are going to constitute what's considered a heavy object in the game. And then finally, we have our third type of item, which is going to be a quest item. So this character is going to start with the ability to go on a quest while playing the game. Once this is unlocked, you simply flip it over, and this then becomes an active item in the game. Now that you have a basic understanding of what's sort of here on the player board, I'm going to go through basic actions. A consistent theme that you're going to see throughout this game is this icon, which I'm pointing at. This indicates that you can perform an action, and it indicates the number of cards you have to discard from your hand in order to complete that action. On a typical turn, what you're going to do is you're going to have a hand of 5 different cards. So if you perform different actions, what you're going to have to do is simply spend a card, and you're going to place it into your discard pile. So what we can see right here is that we have a list of different sort of basic actions. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of zoom in on these so you can have a quick look at them. So for one card, and what this is going to do is we can have multiple types of actions that occur. So if I spend one card, I can perform a movement action, and that's going to be just simply moving my token, moving my pawn from one room to the other room. We're never going to stop in corridors in this game, so we're always going to be moving from room to room. Next, we have 2 different types of combat attacks. What we're looking at right here is a pistol icon, and notice that this action can only be done if you're in combat. So this allows you to do a shoot or a melee attack action. Later on, I'll walk you through how combat works directly. Next, we have an icon in which it's a pistol, but there's an X through it. There's a red X. What this means is this is an out of combat action only. So we can pick up things like a heavy object. Well, we kind of talked about what that means before. What are heavy objects? We have the carcass, we have corpses of other players, and we have eggs that we can pick up from the nest. Next, we have a trade action, and this can only be done outside of combat. You can trade equipment between different characters and heavy objects. We also have a craft item action that we can perform to make crafted items. Later on in this tutorial series, I'll walk you through how to craft items. Finally, when we get down to the bottom part of this card, we have a different type of movement. We talked earlier about basic movement, and it says regardless of combat. This can be fleeing from an enemy or just moving quickly to the next room. What we see right here is that we have careful movement. For a careful movement, we're going to expend 1 extra card, but it's going to then allow us to pick where our noise tokens go. So I'll go ahead and pop one of these onto the screen. I'll walk you through the mechanic of noise a little bit later, but just understand that if you move silently using careful movement, it's much easier to survive, and it's much easier to avoid attacks from enemies. You can also find different items throughout the game with this action icon marker. So in this case, if we wanted to use this thermite charge, it means that we have to use this card in conjunction, also discard one of our action cards from our hand. Next up, I want to talk about this as well, is that we have other types of cards that aren't necessarily used as actions, but can still be spent from your card. As an example, we have this card that says Feel of the Dark. It says discard this card during the event phase to ignore the in darkness effect of an event for you, or in darkness, discard this card during a surprise attack after drawing an attack card to ignore its effect. So in this case, we can play these interrupt cards not necessarily on our turn. Now, typically when you play a turn in Nemesis Lockdown, you're going to have the ability to play 2 actions per turn. In this case, this is an interrupt event which can be played from your hand during a certain sort of triggered event, and it allows you to do stuff outside the normal turn action. Next, we have this icon as well, and this sometimes confuses players. We have a 0, but it also has the action marker on it. So if you ever want to spend a card with 0 on it, this just simply means it goes into your discard pile, but you don't have to play any additional cards while you are playing a card with a 0 action point marker on it. Now that we have a basic understanding of actions, we're going to go over the basic move. So on this card, and we went ahead and showed this before, we have a basic move action, and that's going to cost us 1 card and 1 action. So we're going to move back up to the board, and here we have the lab rat in the isolation room, and the lab rat wants to move from the isolation room to this unknown room right here. So what I did at the start of the turn is that I drew my hand of cards. I'm going to go ahead and take one of those cards, and I'm going to simply play it down into the discard pile next to the player board. Now what I do is I take the player marker and I move it to the next room. There is this upside down token with a question mark on it. That's an exploration token. I'm going to flip it over, and it has a 3 on it, and it also has one of these malfunction token markers on it, which corresponds to this plastic piece. I'm going to take these off to the side, lift this up, and I'm going to flip the room over. Now, when I did this exploration token, notice that there's a 3 on it. Hopefully that comes into focus a little bit better. That is going to correspond to the number of items in this room. Now, if I zoom in on the board, all of the hexagons in this game have a little arrow next to it. So since I pulled a 3 on the exploration token, I'm going to match the 3 up to here, and I'm going to place that onto the table. Next, I take my miniature, put it on the table, and then I take a malfunction token and place it into the room. The malfunction token simply means I can't use the room for any of its special abilities. So this is going to be the power generator. I can't use the power generator action, but I can still go ahead and search. Now that I moved into the room, I'm going to take what's called a noise roll. There is a 10-sided die that's included with this game, and since I moved, I just roll the noise die and see what happens. So let's see what happens. I roll a 1, and consequently to that, since I have a 1, I'm going to take the noise marker and put it on the corresponding sort of location here, which is going to be the air vent. There is a centralized location for air vents on the map. I'm going to go ahead and show that to you, and it's located over on the left-hand side. So this shows that now there has been noise in the air vents. So any additional noise in any of the air vents in any of the rooms, and it's going to trigger an enemy. For the example, we're going to go ahead and redo this noise roll, and this time we're going to say that we rolled a 2. So once again, we're going to take the noise token and we're going to stick it in the corresponding spot on the map. So in this case, we're going to stick it on the corridor in between the isolation room and the power generator room. In the future, if any additional noise tokens would be placed on this corridor, which there would be 2 of them here, that causes an alien to spawn basically in the room that you're in, and it could attack you. It could perform what's called a sneak attack action. So kind of what's interesting about this game is that you have to be really careful when noise tokens come onto the board. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and sort of reset this round, and we're going to go ahead and just replay it real quick, and we're going to do the sort of slow movement action, the one that actually costs 2, and this is called a careful move. So at the bottom of our card, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this, we have what's called a careful move action, which is located down here. It's going to cost 2 cards to play this instead of 1. So now I'm going to go back to the map, and I'm going to show you kind of what this means. So since the action costs 2, I'm going to be forced to spend 2 cards and stick them into my discard pile. So from my hand, I have 2 cards. I'm going to take those and stick those into my discard pile. Now I'm going to move my character and I'm going to move it to the next room. We know that this is a 3, so we know that we're going to set the room to 3. So we're going to go ahead and do that again. We also put the malfunction token onto the room, and we place our character onto the room. Now in this case, we still get a noise token, but we do not have to roll the random die. Since we did a careful movement, I can take this movement noise token and I get to put it wherever I feel like. So it gives you a lot more advantage on where to place it. So I could place it here, or I could place it in the corridor down here. It just gives you a lot better opportunity to control the actual noise when you're moving through the base. Now I'm just going to give you a little bit of advice and a little bit of strategy when you're playing Nemesis Lockdown. Let's say this is the situation. On our last turn, we moved the lab rat into this room. We did a random roll, and we got a 3, which allowed us to then place this noise marker into the hallway. Now the lab rat wants to travel over to the adjacent room, and that means that they're going to be traveling down a noisy hallway. So here's where some of the danger occurs if you just do a normal movement. So I'm going to go ahead and just move over just a little bit. And as you can see, the room that we would be moving into has a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4 though located. If I were to just spend 1 card and do a normal move action, I would move into this room and it would probably force me to roll this die. Now, if I were to roll another 3 or a 4 when I get into the next room, that's going to allow me to place a second noise marker on this hallway, which is basically going to cause an alien to spawn. And that's something that we want to definitely avoid, because when the aliens pop up, they typically attack you and they can inflict damage upon you. So in this situation, if I'm moving toward a room and there's already a noise token in the hallway, it's a good option to take your 2 cards, throw them into your discard pile, and then what you're going to do is the careful movement action. So I'm going to go ahead and simulate that. So when we get over to this room, we're going to pop this token. And in this case, it has a fire marker on it. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this room upwards. We know that we have an arrow, and we had a 2 on this marker, so I'm going to rotate this to the 2 position. Okay. Since it has a fire marker, I'm going to put the fire marker onto the map. Then I'm going to move my character into this room. Since I did a careful movement, I do not have to roll the movement die, and then I can choose where this token goes. So in this case, I'm going to put it in between the isolation room and the cooling system room that I just unlocked. If I were to roll, I would have a pretty good chance of rolling and thus getting a monster. So by moving between a normal movement action and a careful movement action, you can definitely prevent monsters from attacking you in this game. One quick note on movement: if you are the purple player and you're moving into a room with another player, or if you're moving into a room with one of the aliens, you do not have to do a noise check for those turns. So just kind of keep that in mind. It's a little bit of a bonus, especially if you're trying to move around with some of your companions. Just be aware though, if you have 2 of your companions in the same room, there is a portion of the game where you are using the token bag. So I'll throw that on the screen real quick. And that can become pretty dangerous because sometimes the characters in the same room will be very, very noisy together. And if you draw an adult token, which looks like this, it will force you all to do another noise roll in the room that you're in. So doing 2 noise rolls in the same room will often lead to an alien spawning. Next, we're going to talk about the danger icon on the die. So I'm going to go ahead and pick it up. And it looks like 3 claw marks. There's a 1 in 10 chance of you actually pulling this when you roll it. So let's say our wonderful lab rat wants to move from the isolation room into the cooling system room and go ahead and does that. They spend 1 card to do a normal move. And when they get into this room, they roll this die and they get the danger marker. If there are any aliens in adjacent rooms, it summons them into the room. So what happens is that in this case, it would pull this alien into this room, which would be very dangerous for the lab rat. So let's go ahead and take this off the board, and we're going to redo this move, and I'm going to show you what happens if you roll this die and there are no aliens adjacent to the room. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and spend our one action. We're going to put it into our discard pile. We're going to move into the isolation room. We roll the die and we get unlucky, and we roll the danger icon on the die. What that does, if there's no alien in an adjacent room, which there's not, it's going to put a noise marker on every single corridor around that room. Now, if there's already, let's say, a noise marker on one of these hallways, it doesn't add a second one. It just fills up the hallway, all of the corridors around that room with noise tokens. So it makes it extremely dangerous and extremely deadly once you're leaving this room, because now every junction, every corridor around this room has a noise marker on it. Next, we're going to talk about another special icon that appears on the noise die, and it's just basically an X on the die. This is known as the silence face on the die. So I'm going to go ahead and simulate what happens. So as an example, again, we're going to do a normal movement action. I'm going to go ahead and take one card, place it into the discard pile. I'm going to take the lab rat and then move it to an adjacent room. If this X is actually rolled, what's fantastic about it, that's called the silence side of the die. When you do that, you don't actually add any noise tokens, so you don't add any of these to any of the corridors after you do that. It's almost like a freebie. It's kind of like a, hey, you move super silent and thus didn't generate any noise. Now, there's kind of a caveat to that, and this now relates to a condition that can exist on your character marker sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this down, and I'm going to zoom in just really quickly so you can see what it's called. There's a location on your character sheet called slime. And what happens in that case, if your character is slimed and you roll silence, it actually flips it to the danger icon side of the die. So kind of what does that look like? They have these clear markers in the game. If you do get slimed, you simply take it and you put it on top of the slime position on the board. So anytime you would roll a silence on the noise die, it just simply converts it over to a danger icon. So slime can be fairly impactful, and it gets you into trouble in some of the worst situations possible. So here's kind of a quick example. Let's say your character is slimed. You move from the isolation room into the cooling system room, and then you roll this die. It would actually roll the danger marker instead, and it would pull the enemy into the room. So no longer are you moving silently when you're slimed. You're actually moving around and you're making quite a bit of noise. So there are different special items in the game that can help you remove slime. Also, there are special rooms that you can execute the actions in the rooms to also remove the slime from you. So we just talked about slime, so I'm going to walk you through what can actually happen on one of these exploration tokens. We're just going to say that we move into this room. Now, when we flip this token over, notice that it has a slime icon on it. So just by the fact that you're moving into the room, you get slimed. And thus you would take this status marker and you would stick it on your board to denote that you're slimed. Then you would flip the card over, rotate it to the appropriate location, and then you'd have to do a noise roll. So you can actually get slimed while you're moving, and then when you do roll the noise die, it then flips it over to the danger icon, thus summoning enemies into the room. So even though you're not slimed when you start moving, you can instantaneously become slimed. Next up, we're going to talk about doors, and the version of the game I have has these cool plastic doors. When you move into some of the rooms and you flip the token over, notice that there is a door icon on this. I'll try to zoom in, and yeah, you can see it now a lot better. So when that happens, and let's say just move into our wonderful cooling system room again, this door is going to be placed in between what you just moved through. And this simulates that now a door has sealed behind you, and you can't no longer move through this corridor from here to here. Now, in those cases, you're still going to go ahead and roll the die. So if you do that, and let's say we roll a 1, and that's what's here, the noise marker still goes into the hallway, and it's considered active in this corridor, even though there is a door now placed in that corridor. So what do doors do? Well, doors prevent you from moving through, and you can do, different types of cards to get through that door. And there's different special effects in the game that you can do. So as an example, a lot of the character decks have a card called Demolition, and it says destroy one closed door in a corridor connected to a room that you were in. So in that case, you just simply take this door and rip it apart, put it back onto the map, and that shows that the door has been permanently sort of blasted open. It can no longer be closed throughout the course of the game. Now, what does that mean if there's an enemy, so this giant alien is trying to get to you? So aliens move in the game, and I'll show you later how they do that, but having a door can be a nice barrier between you and the alien. So if the alien attempts to move and the door's in its way, go ahead and grab this door marker, kind of pop it apart, and the door becomes damaged. And if the alien then wants to move through it again, it can, but it prevents it from moving through one time. So you can put doors down, and you can actually close doors to protect you from the aliens, and it does slow them down. It's kind of a cool mechanic in the game, and it definitely adds a lot of fun. Here are a couple other exploration tokens that we'll just mention. Now, we already talked about silence on this, which is the one on the left, and then we also talked about danger on the right. This works identical pretty much to when you roll the die and you're moving. So if you have a silence effect that pops when you explore a room, you don't actually have to roll the die that turn. And then consequently, if you get the danger icon, it will cause aliens to charge into the room if they're in an adjacent room, and if not, then you'll have to put down noise markers all around the room that you're in when that token pops. Consequently, too, the slime token also nullifies the silence icon on this token if you pull it. So it works very similar to how the dice work. So we did talk about the fire tokens and the malfunction tokens. I'm going to go ahead and just throw them onto the board so we can have a quick conversation about what they do. So first, if a room is on fire, anything that sort of ends its turn in the room will suffer a light wound. Now, what does that look like on a character? You're just going to take one of these clear markers, and then you're going to put it onto the board. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. So it says 1 light wound, 2 light wounds, and then a serious wound. So you would get 1 light wound from being on fire. If you already had a light wound, you would move to 2, and if you already had 2 light wounds, you would move to here. And then you would pull a serious wound card and add it to your character. If you have 3 serious wounds and 1 or more light wounds, you are killed and eliminated from the game. So next we're going to talk about the malfunction token in the room. So we're going to say that, hey, the room is not on fire, but it has a malfunction token on it. So as you can see at the top of the card, we got 2 different things going on. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so you can see the top of this card. So it has an action that you can play in the cooling system room. So for spending 2 cards, it says you can initiate the auto-destruct sequence on the base. So we kind of talked about that before earlier on. It was one of the ways that you could help survive. If you initiate the auto-destruct, it's going to put the auto-destruct tokens on the board, and eventually it's going to open sort of the bunker door. So we talked about that before. But if this malfunction token is on this room, you can't actually use that cooling system, nor can you use this little computer icon. And I'm going to go ahead and just grab the computer deck really quick so you can have a look at what that is in the game. So there's a computer access deck that sits toward the top of the board. So I'm going to go ahead and sort of zoom out, and it's going to sit right here on the board toward the top of it when you're playing this game. So if you have a malfunction token on this room, you can't actually use the computer access for that room. There's also something else that happens as well. So there's a certain number of these fire tokens and a certain number of these malfunction tokens. If all of the fire tokens are out on the game board and you have to draw another fire token, the game ends and everybody inside the base is killed. Same thing with the malfunction tokens. If you have all of the malfunction tokens out on the board and you draw another one, the game ends and everybody's killed in the base. Now, there's a caveat to this. You can never have two malfunction tokens on the same room, nor can you have two fire tokens on the same room, so they have to be spread out across the base. It does happen every once in a while that the base catches on fire and explodes, or you have enough malfunctions that the base explodes as well. At this point, I think you have a pretty good understanding of the basic mechanics for Nemesis Lockdown. I'm going to make one more video. I'm going to focus on combat and some of the other actions in the game that help you be successful. Due to the complexity of this game, I think it's really difficult to simply pop it out of the box and put it onto the table. The first couple times I played it, we spent a lot of time with the rule book. In addition to that, I'm going to give you a little bit of advice as well. There is an application for this game, and I purchased it on Steam, and I played that quite a bit, and it helped me really learn the basic mechanics of the game. Another thing that's interesting about this game is the price point. It's in the $200 to $250 range, depending on where you purchase this game. That can be a pretty hefty price tag. So if you do want to check out the game to make sure it's right for you, you can buy the application on Steam. I think it was only like $20, so you can kind of test drive the game. This is just a big investment, and if you're going to blow through $200 to $250, I recommend at least understanding if you enjoy the game before you purchase it. Now, I will say that the pieces are pretty amazing. The artwork is amazing on the board game itself. So it is a good investment if you like this style of game. If not, maybe the digital-based version of the game is right for you. So I want to thank you for joining me today, and as always, have fun gaming.